About 50 minutes, and so we want to enable each of the 10 groups to give feedback for 2 minutes. So that's 20 minutes of the 50 minutes. Then there's about 25 minutes of discussion, and then about 5 minutes just to wrap up, and then conclusions. One of the key things is where the 4 organisations are going to take the issues that are raised and how that's going to be taken forward. Peter here made a big lead in developing a 2030 vision, and so one of the thoughts is to focus on one of those issues that affect decision making now, but also beyond the current local plan. There may be issues that the groups are going to identify that the city and the community need to take further. So as leader of the City Council, obviously I'm going to be attentive, and I'll be listening particularly to those issues that we as a city need to focus on, but also the wider partnerships. So that would be the second level of issues, and then the third level of issues is there's a number of issues which I'm sure will involve us making the case for either resources or change in a wider way. So if I can hand over to Group 1, we're going to go 1 to 10. Obviously some of the groups will have similar themes. Groups 1 to 5 are focusing on the contributions by Wendy and Nikki, and then the groups 6 to 10 are on the second two, but I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of overlap. So in just 2 minutes, as Nicholas Parsons might say, Andy Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thanks to Ross for keeping it so well organised and in order so far. I'm afraid we didn't keep to the brief at all. But we'll wing it. We've got a couple of minutes. So I think the first thing we want to do is actually define why we thought Cambridge was special. That took about half an hour, which is why we didn't get much further than that. But I thought that was important because all these things are within that context. So I wrote down my key words that came out of that, but of all those words came neighbourhood and this human scale of Cambridge. So there were differing views about whether a neighbourhood could exist within a single city of 400,000, or whether the city should stay at 100,000, it should be in a necklace around it. But this whole idea of human scale, being where when you're in your neighbourhood, you're able to walk to things, whether that's to the shops or to a job or whatever. We got other good words like serendipity, energy, paradise, but we also got deprivation, and that's something we need to think about a little bit more. So we thought Cambridge was special, which is good news. I think in terms of community concerns raised by Wendy, I did test this one a little bit by saying, well, the public were engaged in coming up with a local plan and the transport strategy, and was knocked down quite firmly for saying that. So I think really what we found is it's perhaps a lack of engaging consultation, and certainly then as you go into the individual consultations on the city deal itself, a feeling as though the views aren't being listened to. But it may just pull back to an idea of not really fully engaging or fully being part of that original vision and strategy in the first place. So a couple of actions that we came out of that, I'm not sure we give the actions to, they're just actions, so Lewis will sort them out. One is I think we do need that clear sort of strategy vision that perhaps tries to engage more of the population, so our group definitely, but I also come back to the wider group, comments about groups who don't have a voice, or groups who are actually even in the area at the moment. But another look at that vision is something that perhaps we should look at. And actually another point that came up was just building confidence in the process. I think there's a lot of mistrust in the current processes, and we need to rebuild that confidence moving forward. Given which, although Nikki did a fantastic presentation, we had only about a minute to do the university.
You've got 5 seconds.
Okay. I guess the main concern was one he said was around the university and the colleges being not as well connected as they could be, and how that impacts on things like land issues and how they can contribute more strategically what's going forward. In fact, you've got 30 different colleges all with bits of land looking after their own interests. The university trying to manage all that in one way. I'm sure there's a lot of views on that as well.
Okay, thanks Andy. So there's some big issues there, both on process but also on focus and targets. Ray Hughes, number 2.
Yeah, thank you, Lewis. Does that work? Yeah, it does work. Right, as with Andy, we diverted completely off the brief, and I hold myself responsible for that, but I'll tell you what we did talk about. We a lot of talk about needing to set a big vision, so we talk about at least 50 years and knowing how you're going to get there and planning for that, so not having the kind of incremental change that we seem to have at the moment as the group saw it. Generally the group wasn't against change, but about managing it, not controlling it, and there was a discussion about the difference between the two. A lot of talk about diversity and variety in the city, so one member of the group talked about not socially cleansing the city and only allowing certain people to live here, and that had a lot of flavour. A lot of talk about transport and how we spread the magic of Cambridge and don't focus everything within the city, so a lot of talk about underground systems, tram systems, railway systems, corridors and growth along those corridors as being the way forward. We had an interesting discussion towards the end about the tools that we all have to deliver this change and how we actually need to change those tools, particularly around financing, long-term financing, and how we can plan for development. I think a very strong view about cycling and walking as being critical, and large parts of Cambridge being focused just on cycling and walking, with the car very much being secondary and on the outer areas. A split on congestion charge, but a number of the group felt very strongly that was a good way of raising money and controlling traffic. Quite a lot of talk about better park and ride, rail, light rail, etc. So in summary, as I say, it was about deciding on where we want to get to and establishing the right tools to get us there.
Okay, thank you. And the next is Andrew Lim, and then after that it's Nick, so if you can pass the mic along to Nick.
Okay, so Group 3, some members have expressed a number of similar themes already emerging, so good luck for those of you later on in finding something you say. But so again, consensus that there needs to be efforts to engage a broad range of communities in understanding the growth plans in a general term, as well as the specific kind of interventions as they come along. So better communication and engagement around all of that. A lot of discussion around the need for more so affordable housing in the city, including social housing, specifically council housing. In the city area, and discussions about ways that could be funding, including utilising innovative private sector funding models or other kind of large employers, so that housing is available at sub-market rents in the city, so that people on lower pay don't have to commute so far expensively and so on. A sort of a sense that some of the means and measures and controls that are available to us locally are determined nationally. So actually, if you want to change what the council in particular, for instance, is able to do in terms of planning and housing, then you need to challenge national planning and housing policy and direct it via there, please. Council needs to implement its own planning policies robustly in the face of all sort of demand for development and so on to ensure that the beauty and quality is retained. Again, need for an overall vision and strategy, including beauty and landscaping. A desire just to kind of revisit quickly whether the assumptions around bus usage are accurate and whether that does indeed justify a bus-based strategy. Desire to develop a strategic view of cycling options for Greater Cambridge, and a desire to put in place measures that will improve air quality.
Well, that was very short, so thank you.
You spoke too quickly. It's very hard.
Right, and next we've got Nick.
Right, table 4. On the approaches to Cambridge, some felt Greenbelt should be sacrosanct, others suggested corridors of beautifully designed growth. Park and ride should be free and much nicer to use. General dislike of busways. We unanimously liked the Cambridge Connect and the light rail underground plans. We must be thinking long term. We had David on our table thinking 40, 50 years ahead. We like the new stations at Addenbrooks and North Cambridge. In the city centre, we don't like double-decker diesel buses. We don't think they're appropriate in the centre. Please remove street clutter, including estate agent signs. Try and improve bottlenecks, pedestrian bottlenecks between the city and the west, such as Burroughs Walk. Perhaps a new pedestrian link from King's Lane across the river to West Road. Open spaces in the city centre should be sacrosanct. Worry that planning is not always joined up. Question whether Section 106 money really goes, we don't know. On tourism, it must be long-term, not day trippers with their packed lunches. Improve the evening economy. Ban tourist buses from Queen's Road. Queen's Road should be one of the most beautiful streets in Europe, not a bus corridor. Heavy tourist tax suggested by David. Housing we didn't get time to talk about. No planned boxes. Worry about student housing and short-term Airbnb type lettings leading to featureless areas. We had a dream list of 3 or 4. One was to form a company, perhaps a bit like Cambridge Connect, to promote and put our plans forward. We'd like to have an opera house or a conference centre, international conference centre, 1,500 people. We love the underground rail links. We also want rail links to Oxford and Haverhill, and a freight rail from Felixstowe to the Midlands, so that those horrible lorries get off the A14. And well, that's it. That's 2 minutes.
So what were you doing for the rest of the time? Okay.
Right, number 5. We talked about. Can you hear me? Go on. John? Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk at it in your...
Is that better?
Yeah.
We talked first of all about what we didn't hear in the presentations this morning, and there were 3 things. One was a really clear understanding of the world-class importance of research being done in Cambridge, that this was not just for Cambridge, but was actually of complete world-class, and therefore we need to sustain that. Secondly, there was a clear feeling that there was not... Very direction. Right. Secondly, that there was a really important need for a longer-term vision, not just short-term things that we were doing in terms of the city deal. I mean, there was a degree of unhappiness with the current city deal tactical things that are being done, but there was a clear liking in transport for things like metro, for the idea of trams and other kinds of Is that on? I'll speak loudly, it's probably easier. They like the idea of cheap public transport. There was underlying this in terms of travel, a clear view that there should be more control. And again, when we came to talk about issues of planning for housing and planning for businesses, a view that actually the free market approach to the development of Cambridge was not something we could now go on with, and that we had to move towards some degree of use planning, which would be encapsulated in the planning consents, to make sure the right kinds of businesses came to Cambridge rather than all businesses. On the question of location, there was a discussion about whether we would or should halt the growth, and I think the view generally was that we shouldn't, but that we should be seeking to manage it. On location, there was a discussion about whether the university could, in fact, for its research growth, which is where the main growth is happening, move to more satellite sites outside the centre. There was a discussion about whether ARU could, in fact, needed to be dead centre on East Road, and whether that, with its large teaching population, could be moved to somewhere like North Stowe or other places like that. There was a concern about affordable housing. Not only affordable housing in Cambridge, but also the creation of rural ghettos in places like Littleport, where the people who are having to do the street cleaning and the other sort of maintenance work of Cambridge are being forced to live. So we need to look outside. And there was generally, in a transport sense, a view that we need to understand the relationships between places like Royston, Chatteris and Bury, and the transport link should be dealing at that scale, not just within the Cambridge area. There was a discussion about whether the private schools should be moved outside of Cambridge. Then underlying, on the what to do, a revisiting of the Marshall's case, a revisiting of the loads on the Addenbrooke's Relief Road, and the concern that actually the crossover with Shelford had been done on the cheap and then was leading to further congestion, and whether that should be looked to be widened. And lastly, a clear view that we need to have more resources available within the planning departments and the transport departments of the council in order to do this enormous task in front of us, and a recognition that this would probably be cost in taxes or in direct charge subventions from those who use those services, to make sure that we have an ability to bring quality thinking and analysis to the planning that's being done at the centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Do you want to try, and then if you pointed towards...
So we moved on to Tom's presentation, and we started off with who, why, and what. And really what it came down to was a structured approach for the whole region, including the villages. But somebody put out that we're actually riding a tiger. You can't tame the tiger, but you can actually track its movements and keep up with it. Effectively, it's efficiency versus democracy and how we manage the process. And that there's a lot of working in silos. There's a lot of use of the word they, and no one knows who they is or are. And technology is actually putting people further away from people on the ground. You want to contact someone, it's an email address, you don't know where it's going. People don't feel that they're being able to talk to the decision makers as easily possibly in the past. That's just one view. But also it's skills and continuity, good officers, making sure they're well supported, making sure they stay in the role, and possibly looking at their pay. We talked about urban development corporations. Is that what's needed? Again, it's that whole efficiency versus democracy point. And actually, it's the quality of local democracy as well, educating officers and the councillors by actually what the people want, rather than just sticking very rigidly to policies and to budgets. And it needs to be creativity. Cambridge is a place of fun. We love it because it has its quirks, its differences, and actually making sure those are interpreted into our everyday life we felt was essential. And it's a balanced dialogue, making sure that everybody's views are representative. So then we moved on to the business view, and I think we were all pleased that David actually gave us a realistic approach from the business world, although possibly a little scary. And taking one of his slides, we sort of headed up our response as mind the gap. Where's the smart city approach, the technology apps, the funding for the technology? Is it really in place? Do we need to be putting more in this direction? And it's also the business representatives on the city council and the district councils, and similarly the colleges also had representation before in this area. Should we be looking at the quality of the councillors and who they're representing, as well as the people? We also looked at match funding. There was a lot of talk about the city deal being match funded, and where's that coming from? And should businesses in Cambridge actually be taking a greater role in helping? And how do we go and engage on that basis? It's a political culture, and also a younger voice. Where's the younger voice in all of this? We really do need to engage with younger people about where they see their visioning for the city. So all in all, I think we also thought that groups form where there's voice and communication. So it's actually having that voice, that one voice, and backing something. And it comes down to what everybody else has said, which is a long-term vision. But the real question is, who is going to do the long-term vision?
Thank you, Emma. Joel, Group 7.
Thank you, Group 7. Just to start, long-term vision was our number one, and that vision really needed to be developed and shared by all, with a particular focus on meeting the needs of the local residents, and not forgetting small business in all this talk about big businesses, but there is a significant small business sector that we need to ensure has a voice in shaping this vision. Also the need for the universities to collectively gather and help to shape that vision in a more united way, rather than trying to compete with one another for bigger and better, so that there's more of a sort of collective approach across all the different colleges within the university. Secondly, underpinning this is really a collective understanding of what the sort of social and environmental capacity of the city is, and what the impacts are in terms of the growth on the social and environmental resource of the city. So looking at the city centre and how much footfall it can carry, looking at water and other natural resources that we all depend on for our future and for our lives, and making sure that data, that information is available and understood by everybody, so we all have an informed position when we're talking about shaping this vision. Thirdly, we talked about some specifics. We were very keen on understanding and learning from case studies like the CV1 development, what's worked, what hasn't worked, why hasn't it worked, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes and we learn from that. We make time for that in our planning, and I appreciate with pressure on resources that's always a challenge, but it's really important that we don't just crack on with the next project without really evaluating the outcomes and whether the previous project was successful. And then finally, another specific was pursuing the UNESCO heritage status for the historic core to ensure that the quality of change that's impacting on the city is special and it's sensitive to that historic core. And we felt that the status that UNESCO standard would give us would help to ensure that was achieved. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. And next is Jeremy Smith with Group 8.
Thank you, Lewis. There are many themes that have already been covered. Unsurprisingly, the overall vision was very high on the agenda. There's a feeling that the city deal vision is too short term, and if we were looking longer term, it would be perhaps a very different vision. In terms of the political arrangements and political will, there's definitely concern there in the group. Do the politicians have the vision? Are they facing up to some of the difficult decisions and some of the uncomfortable truths of the situation that the city is facing with the growth and with the compromises that is sometimes bringing? So there's definitely a need there, I think, to be honest about actually the position that we're in and the growth that we're facing. There's definitely a theme around the university and colleges, and they need to be more engaged in the wider development agenda across the city, and actually trying to work more within the planning system rather than I think a perception that in some cases actually their engagement is negative in going counter to the local plans that are going through the system. And is there a way that actually for the university and colleges and others they can be more in the tent on that and more constructively working with the councils and the community in bringing forward schemes for development? As with some of the other groups, there's concern about tourists. We didn't go as far as a tourist tax, but there's definitely a lot of concern over actually the sheer number of tourists and how they clog up our networks, whether it's the pedestrian network or the road network or the park buses or whatever else. There was also, as with some of the other groups, a discussion about, well, actually, what is Greater Cambridge, and in the context of the jobs growth and the housing growth that would logically need to accompany that, actually, are we actually clear that Greater Cambridge is far wider than just the city itself, and we need to be dealing with that holistically. And I think one final thing I'd mention is that there was certainly a concern in the group that we don't understand all of the impacts on all of the elements of the community, and a particular request that we look at impacts on public health of what we're looking at here, and impacts on particular sectors of society, and older people was mentioned specifically in that context.
Okay, February Phillips, number 9, and we've got 2 more with you, February.
Yeah, we're nearly there. So we talked about, firstly, who Cambridge is for. So people in the moment are being priced out of the city, potentially leading to monoculture. There's not enough legislation about levels of affordable housing provision in new developments, and not enough legislation about private landlords with empty properties. Those 2 things could improve the housing sector greatly in the city. We also talked about how bits of areas around villages could be released, so where there's currently green belt, and everyone was supportive of that, so actually releasing green belt around villages that are on railway lines. And we also talked about how housing provision could be provided on brownfield sites in the city, such as around the sewage works, which we all know has its own issues. We moved on to transport and talked about how the economy has to allow for strategic planning of transport infrastructure, and drip feeding money into that isn't a way necessarily of making it happen. Examples that were cited as being positive were Sheffield and Nottingham, and in Nottingham it was brought up that actually a lot of people are against the proposals for a new tram system, I believe. And strong leadership made those happen, and they're now successful. So we have to keep that in mind. We also talked briefly about how the privatisation of bus services and how those are run by private businesses means that the council can't just put on a new bus service, and actually things like City Deal cannot do that. The key to all this was, of course, what everyone else has probably mentioned, which is strategic planning. So any of these ideas that we come up with need someone to be thinking about how to join up the different councils and how to fund the development, how to fund that planning, strategic planning. Everyone acknowledged that growth is both good and inevitable, I believe, in our group, but it comes with its own challenges, and they need that investment in strategic thinking. And that's it.
Thank you. And finally, come to you, that's Ian Maynard for Group 10.
Hello, we started with an expression which I think may have come from Tom, I don't know, but I'll not steal it for myself, but be ambitious, aim at nothing and you'll hit it every time. And I think we need to be ambitious about what we have in Cambridge and the potential for this city. Who are we doing this for? It is people, obviously, but it's not just people now, and it's not just people in this room, it's businesses, it's future generations, it's people who don't yet live or can't live in Cambridge but would like to live closer to here to share the wealth of Cambridge. So think more inclusively and think in a broader geography. On business, there was an acknowledgement that business will grow. David hit it pretty hard, but it's true, business will grow. How do we maintain, though, a high quality of place and still allow that business to grow? One of the ways, and it is important to maintain a high quality place to allow the business to grow, one of the ways is how do you extract value from the business growth to then invest in an ambitious way, particularly around transport. And there are ways of doing that, of extracting that growth, but we need to think of them. And then the common theme being up here is strategy. We need to think strategically and long term, not short term. We need to be looking at 10, 20, 30 years ahead and plan for that. On the point of how you make that happen, there was quite a surprising and strong belief that we should have a benevolent dictator. And maybe that's a Cambridgeshire mayor or someone else. Thank you.
That was very brief, thank you. So I think you've got really excellent potted summaries.